I am an African.
At the interview, some people may not know what the IMF is or what exactly they do. So just to start out to get people caught up, what is the IMF's job and what is its role in relation to Africa?
So the IMF was set up, let me give you some history as background, I think. So the IMF was set up at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 to establish the post-Second World War International Monetary Order. And the job it was set up to do at the time was to oversee a system of relatively fixed exchange rates based on a fixed link between the US dollar and gold at $35 an ounce of gold. And the IMF would oversee that system by looking to make sure that countries were following the policies needed to keep their relatively fixed value of currency. And if necessary, giving them money to support them in order to keep that par value, the fixed value of their currency. That system ended in 1971. And since then, the IMF's role has been constantly evolving. So even though it's still sort of technically an international monetary institution, the role that it plays is much broader than that. So it plays a much bigger role in regard to debt and to generally dealing with macroeconomic problems in member countries. And so what it does is every year it conducts what's called a surveillance mission to every one of its member countries. And initially that was to see, is it following the policies that would allow it to maintain the balance of payment situation that would help it keep the value of its currency fixed. Now currencies are floating in value. So it's looking to see, does the country follow policies that are sustainable? Does it have a debt that's sustainable? Does it follow? And now it's very broad ranging what it will look at. And that's been one of the problems. There's no limit on what's relevant to what the IMF, at least in theory, should be looking at. And now that the IMF is beginning to look at issues like inequality and climate change, there's almost nothing that's excluded from.
Expanded.
Now, the thing to remember, though, is, I mean, it does this to every country. So once a year, it goes and visits the US Treasury, just the same as it goes and visits, say, the Zambian Ministry of Finance. When it visits the US Treasury, the US Treasury knows it will never need the funding from the IMF. So in reality, it can say, thank you very much. Your advice is very interesting. We've enjoyed this conversation, and then put the report on the shelf somewhere and forget about it if it wants, or it can take it seriously if it wants. A country like Zambia has to say to itself, we might need money from the IMF this year or in the next few years. And so we better listen to what they're saying, because if we do need money, the conditions attached to the money are likely to relate to the advice that it's been given. So its advice is got to be taken a lot more seriously by a country that thinks it might needs money from the IMF.
That's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because and just going a bit back, the whole the IMF initially is normally associated with debt, and whenever there's a debt issue, with the structured adjustment policies and so on. And how its portfolio has expanded now, and you're talking about climate change, you're talking about all of these things. And in your recent article, I think in the conversation, you mentioned the special drawing rights that was recently announced, I think to the tune of about 650 billion for various countries to overcome the pandemic. So could you just explain to us, this is sort of like the latest, biggest thing that the IMF is doing.
Right.
And exactly what does that mean, and how does the average African who's an entrepreneur, say, in whatever business, relate to this, and how does it affect them?
So the special drawing rights are what are called a reserve asset created by the IMF. So all the member states of the IMF agreed in 1969 that the IMF had the power to create special drawing rights. And so the special drawing rights are created. Let me just explain. So the special drawing right is a creation of the IMF. The value of a special drawing right is based on a basket of the 5 most important currencies in the world. So it's the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, and the Chinese renminbi. And so it's sort of a weighted composite of those currencies. So at the moment, the SDR is about $1.40 or somewhere around there in value. But when the IMF creates this, it allocates it to the member states according to their quotas, and which means effectively, and the quota is, in a sense, your share of your contribution to the IMF and your ability to vote and draw money from the IMF. So it's allocated. So the richest and the most powerful countries get most of the SDRs, and the poorest countries get proportionately less. Yeah, exactly. But when you get it, it's what it really is. It's a right. So it's a right to convert your SDRs into dollars or some other hard currency.
So the countries, whatever currency they want the money to be drawn, basically. Then.
So right. So what they could, but it's a bit. When the IMF says we allocating 650 billion SDRs, they're saying to. So let me use South Africa as an example. So they said, South Africa, you're going to get about $4 billion worth of SDRs. Those 4 billion are given to the Reserve Bank and go into the reserves of the currency of the country.
Right.
And then the country can decide to do with it what it wants. It can use it to pay back debts to the IMF or to 15 other organizations that are authorized to hold SDRs. Or it could say to other countries that it owes debts to, we'll give you SDRs in order to settle the debts. So that's a very limited use. The other thing it can do is it can say, I want to convert the SDRs into, say, dollars or euros. And it can go to the IMF and say, please convert these into dollars. And the IMF will say, okay, either you can go to another country, so most likely the US, and they will do it, or we will designate a country that we know has excess dollars to convert that into dollars. And then once you have the dollars, you can use it for whatever purpose you want. So, for example, if Zambia says, okay, we've got the dollars, because the price of copper is going up, we're doing better than we used to. We'll just keep this in reserves and not use it until we actually need it. Or they could say, you know, times are bad because of COVID. We're going to use this money to buy vaccines or to help entrepreneurs import and export things so that the economy can get going. They can do whatever they want with it. So it's a big boost for countries, but it's in limited form until they convert it into another currency. Now, the only catch to keep in mind is that if you use them, there's an interest charge associated with using them, which is at the moment is very low. It's I mean, way below 1%, but it could go up if interest rates go up. But so it's not free money like having dollars in your account.
Yeah, because sort of the way it was announced, it's almost like it's a big piggy bank that, you know, any country can just come and get, but obviously there's conditions attached to the
money. Yeah.
So the only conditions really are that it's limited in what you can do with it. I mean, if Zambia said, you know, I mean, to be absurd, but if we're going to just take the 4 billion, whatever the share, or South Africa said, we're going to take that 4 billion and distribute it evenly amongst the population and just give everybody a one-time payment of that. They could do that. I mean, you know, hopefully no government would actually do that, but in theory that they could do that and just use it in any way they want.
Which is sorry, you could go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so I mean, it's 650 billion is about 5% of total reserves in the world. So it's a big increase, you know, of money created out of thin air in a way.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it is giving every country something more than they had, and except for the interest rate charge, there's no conditions attached.
Hey guys, if you liked that video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
If you'd like to hear more of this, check out the full-length podcast on multiple platforms, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts.
See you guys there.